Very well. We just started the recording right now, and welcome to everyone who are participating in this webinar today. This is a webinar that's done monthly by the UN Refugee Agency. The Division of Human Resources provides outreach presentations to applicants like you on a regular basis. Our goal is to demystify the selection process at UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and to support applicants like you better understand how we hire humanitarians from across the globe to support our efforts to build better futures for people forced to flee. Please note that if you are already an employee at UNHCR, you can find a lot of career management and career development resources at Learn and Connect. So thank you for being here, but also be aware that you have a lot more resources internally. Just go to Learn and Connect, and you're going to find a lot of presentations and materials that can help you better prepare job applications and prepare for interviews as well. We have a number of speakers today who will help you understand the what, the why, and how we use competency-based interviews at UNHCR. So now let's have them introduce themselves, starting with Rosie.
Thank you, Gustavo. Welcome everybody. My name is Rosie Innes. As you can see on the screen, I'm the head of talent planning and communication. This is a unit which is part of the Global Learning and Development Center. And the role of this unit is to build career development capacity in our workforce, managers and HR in the field. Very, very pleased to be with you today, sharing some of that knowledge with external candidates as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Rosie. Now let's go to Nelly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nelly Heveshi. I've been working as Human Resources Officer in the UNHCR Global Service Center in Budapest for the past 14 years of my career. I'm Hungarian, and it's very lovely to see so many participants interested in competency-based interviewing. I very much look forward to having this webinar with all of you. I understand how important a successful interview is in the selection process, and also how different competency-based interviews can be from the various other types of interviews you have outside UNHCR. Thank you.
That's a great point, Nelly, and this is something we are definitely going to highlight today. The differences between questions, including in a competency-based interview that may not necessarily be competency-based, but they cover various areas of importance for you to show how you can be a fit for positions here. Let's move on to our next speaker, and some of you may be familiar with her because she is quite active on LinkedIn, and if you don't follow her on LinkedIn already, you should. This is Dora Shordas. Can you tell us more about yourself, Dora?
Thank you for the warm introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Dora, and I'm really, really excited to be here and meet some of you that I've already interacted on LinkedIn. So I'm originally from Hungary, and I'm with UNHCR actually just a little short of 2 years. So it's going to be 2 years this summer. Time flew fast, and it's been such a pleasure really being part of the organization. I'm within the Division of Human Resources. I'm sitting at the Partnerships and Outreach Unit, and my special role is talent outreach. That's what I'm specializing in. So I'm really excited to be here today, and particularly as I am someone who not so long time ago myself went through such a competency-based interview, so I can already tell you this session is going to be jam-packed with useful information, and it's going to help you tremendously, so enjoy.
Very good, Dora. Dora is my right hand and my left hand when it comes to doing talent outreach at the organization. So please do not forget to follow Dora if you happen to have a LinkedIn account. You can also follow our Twitter account, UNHCR Careers, for more information. My name is Gustavo Araújo. I'm the head of HR Partnerships and Outreach here at UNHCR, and I have been at UNHCR for a bit less than a year. I am happily completing my first year at UNHCR in July. So I'm very excited to be here. I am very proud to be working for this organization, and I am very impressed by the dedication of my colleagues. And maybe some of you in the future will be joining us as well when we have the pleasure of meeting you. Before we get started, we have some important points to mention. One, this presentation contains evidence-based best practices in engaging with interviewers in recruitment processes across sectors. Following these practices does not guarantee, there is a little mistake in there, a typo, does not guarantee any outcome in hiring processes of any organization, including but not limited to UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. This presentation is for information purposes only. And some of you may ask, well, if you won't guarantee anything, how come you're doing it? We are doing it again to demystify the recruitment process, not only at UNHCR, but in other UN organizations that follow very, very similar steps and processes as well. And you can always go to our website, unhcr.org/careers, to get more information, including but not limited to the recordings of this presentation as well. Okay? Now we're going to move forward to the content of the presentation as well. And Dora is going to go over the agenda with us.
All right, so here is what we're going to cover today. The what, how, and why of competency-based interviews, creating and answering questions, recognizing competencies from the job descriptions. We're going to look at how are competencies assessed, and finally, we're also going to practice. Now let's jump right into the content to find more about what is a competency and what are competency-based interviews. And let's hear from Nelly and Rosie, who will elaborate on what interviews at UNHCR are like. Over to you.
So let me just say a few words. What do interviews at UNHCR typically look like? We are a large organization, and because of this, the interview formats may vary slightly. However, if you are invited to an interview for a position, you are likely to find a setup similar to this one. The interview is either in person or through video conference. It takes around roughly 45 minutes. It can be a little bit less, a little bit more, but around 45 minutes, whereby you will be asked 5 to 7 questions. The interview panel consists of typically 3, but up to 5 interviewers. And having panel interviews allow us to obtain more holistic perspective of the candidates after having seen results from previous assessments. Panel members may take turn asking questions during the interview. But who participates in these panels? We can find it out on the next slide. So interview panels typically consist of the hiring manager, who is likely your potential future supervisor or someone above him or her, a technical expert, who could be a potential co-worker or even a client who understands your area of expertise or an area of expertise that is relevant to your job, and a representative from another department who is a neutral board member, and this person could even be from another international organization. Now, in the next slides, Rosie will talk us through about the different types of questions we may expect.
Thank you, Nelly. So types of questions that that may be part of the interview can include fit questions. These are sort of more generic, typical interview questions. You'll have the competency-based questions as well, or you might get some technical questions. So, you know, any of these 3 types, you need to prepare for each of the types of questions. In the next slides, we're going to provide examples of each of these. So if we could go to the next slides, it will become a bit clearer. So biographical questions would be typical at the beginning of an interview. Walk us through your most recent experiences and tell us how it aligns with the positions that you're applying for. Motivation, you know, what particularly interests you about this position? Tell us about what motivates you to work for UNHCR. Less frequent, but you might get a question which is around more a critical incident on your application form. It says you were on a 1-year sabbatical. Can you tell us a little bit more about this experience? The technical questions will be, very specific to the role that you're applying to, and it will be things like, please describe the most complex situation in which you were handling the technical aspects of X, Y, or Z. How exactly did you approach this? And then what we're going to be focusing a lot on is these competency-based questions, which typically always ask for an example from your previous experience. So tell us about a time when you had to manage a difficult work relationship. So, yep, in an interview, just prepare for all these different types of questions. Now, before going into the nitty-gritty content, what's really important is just to understand how long you should be replying these questions. And they've done a lot of studies around this, and you might even see this in, your attention span when somebody's intervening in a meeting. That typically when people go over the 3 minutes, your capacity for really focusing and really concentrating diminishes. And so basically people start, they try not to, and you're trying to concentrate as an interviewer not to do this, but the mind is a monkey mind, and you start getting interventions from other things. If I have to remember to pick up the dry cleaning on my way back to my house, or wherever it might be. So what's really important to have a really impactful answer is to prepare answers which are not more than 3 minutes. And if you do that well, and the answer is interesting enough, then the interviewers will come in with follow-up questions. Oh, you mentioned this, tell us a little bit more about that. So don't prepare answers which are longer than 3 minutes, because as I mentioned, it might feel that answering longer is more effective. It isn't, because the interviewers will start losing attention. So on to the next slide then. I think we're over to Nelly then.
Thanks, Rosie. Structure is key to helping the interviewer digest and take on the information you are giving them. In the introductory part, you repeat or rephrase the question to ensure that you are on the same page. It's a good idea to reflect back first and to ensure that you have heard and understood the question correctly. Then you move on to the content, and you choose basically 3 main points you want to highlight. For each of these points, you state the point, and then you back it up with achievement, with data on experience, with information about how it impacts your own work. And then you move on to the closing part of the question when you sum it up. So you repeat the key points, these 3 points that you mentioned, that you elaborated on, and then you link it back to the question. Now, you may be wondering yourself, how do I structure talking about myself in an interview? I'll provide an example on the next slide. Usually, the first question in an interview, and it's used as an icebreaker also, is the tell us about yourself question. One way to approach this question is the present, past, future structure. How this structure looks like, you can see it in the slide. So first of all, you choose your 3 key messages. Then you start with the present, you describe what you are doing. You move on to the past, where you elaborate on your experiences, your skills that you have gained, the academic qualifications you have. And after that, you go to the future, why you are excited about this opportunity, and why you are the right candidate for this job. Now, let's assume that you are the panel, and you interview me, and you start with the interview question, tell us about yourself. So my example could go like this. Thank you. My name is Nali Heveshi. I'm currently in UNHCR working as an HR officer. I've been working for UNHCR for the past 14 years in the HR function in the Budapest office. And during this time, I've dealt with all kinds of HR-related situations. And this has enabled me to gain a wide knowledge of the processes and rules, as well as develop skills in analyzing, negotiation, and managing resources. Prior to my current position, I worked with various multinational companies where I gained knowledge and skills in performance management, client orientation, and budgeting. I have a degree in economics with human resources specialization and also a master's in English. In addition, I have completed different coaching and mentoring courses. I'm very excited and motivated by this position because not only can I contribute with my knowledge, past experience and skills, but also develop this further in my professional career. While this may come off as a bit artificial at first, the idea is to make it as easy as possible for the panel members to identify that you are fit for the role. And Rosie will now walk us through a potential way to respond to a very common question.
So another typical question at the beginning of an interview is, why would you consider yourself a good candidate for this position? And so following the structure that Nelly spoke about, the idea would be, I'm asked that question, why would you consider yourself a good candidate for this position? So I'd start by saying, there are 3 top reasons why I consider myself a good candidate for this position. And this is where you can go into the same elements that Nelly described and tell us about yourself. You know, what is it that I really want to talk about? So my experience, which is relevant to the role that I'm applying to, the skills that I've identified in the job description that are also important for that role, and then maybe there's some more personal things that you want to talk about. So your ability to remain calm under pressure because it's an emergency situation, or I'm very resilient and I've been able to survive working in very difficult duty stations. So you just need to choose what those 3 key points people need to know, because again, you need to keep that answer short. And then you round it off by summarizing, hence I believe that my past experience, my skills, whatever skills you've chosen, and my personal attributes make me a very good candidate for this position. And it just gives a very clear, very concise, very structured answer, which enables the panelists to digest that information very easily, and it makes for a very impressive start to the interview.
Very good, Rosie. There is one thing that Nelly mentioned as well that was very important. While this may sound somewhat artificial, it is important that you understand that you want to help yourself be as clear as possible to the interview board members. There are plenty of other people who do extremely well in interviews without following a specific formula. But most people do not feel comfortable without understanding what the process is like. The reason why we are showing you these formulas is so that you become more comfortable to answer questions in a structured way. In other words, you understanding your own past experiences, understanding how you had add value to the job, understanding the technical skills and ability needed for the job, can structure answers in a way that you can optimize the amount of time that you have in front of the panel members. And speaking of technical questions, can we learn a little more about the technical questions, Rosie?
Yes, thank you, Gustavo. I mean, we are a technical organization, so it might be part of the interview that somebody will ask you, tell us a time in which you rolled out the protection strategy or something, equally technical. And what's really important is to understand that technical questions require, I mean, it sounds obvious, but a technical answer. Now, because some of these things can be very complex, again, you have to choose information very carefully, and you have to be very systematic in the way that you deliver that information, so it comes over as being very clear, very structured. So you need to really structure the information so it's easy for the interviewer to understand. And the best way of doing that is, again, through example, going back to your work experience, telling a time in which you actually did that, and putting them step by step on how to do that. And again, 3-minute answer. So you really do need to prioritize what's most important, what are the key things that I really need to convey in that technical answer. And then that enables the interviewers, if they have a follow-up question, to ask more questions to go into more depth.
Very good. Thank you very much for the introduction to these first types of questions that we may get in interviews. But now we're going to switch gears a little bit, because we are talking about a competency-based interview that may have different types of questions, like Rosie indicated. It could be fit questions, biographical, motivation, technical questions. But the crux of the competency-based interviews obviously comes with competency-based questions. And this is what Dora and I will be actually covering today. But what is a competency? Well, a competency is made up of observable abilities, skills, demonstrated knowledge, motivations, or traits defined in terms of behaviors needed for successful job performance. If you're thinking about competency, think of a word, behavior. The advantage of competencies is that unlike experience or knowledge, which are not observable usually, and do not address performance, competencies can be broad and are specifically focused on your demonstrated ability to perform a job successfully. For example, let me take the competency of leadership. Candidates often say that they have good leadership skills, but what does that mean? Leadership as a competency broken down in terms of behavior means certain things. That's what psychologists talk about operationalizing, breaking it down, unpacking. So someone who may be a good leader may engage in behaviors like mentoring your subordinates in order to develop them as professionals, or motivating others, especially in difficult times, or delegating tasks appropriately, meaning that you delegate not only to fulfill your operational needs, but to develop the subordinates' skills, professional skills. Seeing the bigger picture and able to translate the bigger picture for the team, creating trust through transparency, working effectively with internal and external stakeholders, taking responsibility for delivery. See how many things I just mentioned about leadership skills. Does it mean that you have to hit all of these items? No. But based on your understanding of the job description and based on your understanding of the operational context, and even based on the way that the questions may be asked, you can certainly try and predict, guess exactly which direction you should be going based on your own experience. In terms of job performance, let's also go to the next slide to learn a little more. Dora, why don't you go ahead and tell us about competency-based interviews?
Thank you, Gustavo. So now that we heard about what competencies are, let's dive a bit more deeper into what competency-based interviews, or in short CBIs, are. So CBI, also known as behavioral interviewing, is a structured interviewing method where interviewees are asked to share examples from their past experiences to describe their behavior in particular situations, as the colleagues have mentioned. So it follows the principle that past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior.
Very good, Dora. Very good. So why are competency-based interview methods being used? Well, as we said before, we're going to repeat. It bears repeating. Past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior. So proper responses to competency-based questions provide interview board members with pieces of evidence, pieces of information that you have had relevant experiences to succeed in the role, either because you have successfully engaged in the same activities in the past, learned from mistakes, and can develop or have transferable skills to do well in the future. Such has been demonstrated by many studies as seen in the next slide here. Okay, as you can see here, there are many methods for you to have selection of personnel, right? There could be structured behavioral interviews, such as competency-based interviews. There could be work sample tests, ability tests. They can look at biographical data. They can check references, but not everything adds up to trying to predict someone's behavior in the future, as well as a skillful and structured interview and other items. What we do in selection processes at the UN, particularly at UNHCR, is to try and collect as much pieces of information as possible, going from the long listing and looking at whether or not you meet the minimum requirements, which, by the way, should not be enough for you to move forward. Minimum requirements are minimum requirements. A lot of people get very upset because they feel that just because they met the minimum requirements or surpassed them, it means that they should move forward. No, the recruiters are also looking into the fit. What experiences have you had in the past? And very importantly, how you describe these experiences that align to the job you're applying for. If you want more information on this, you should check our webinar on optimize your job applications for UNHCR. All you need to do is go to unhcr.org/careers and go to the application and selection piece. and then you scroll down the page and you're going to find a recording to the webinar right there. So the goal here is to show you that there's no perfect prediction. However, the reason why we use competency-based interviews is that because it is a validated method that, along with other pieces of information collected from candidates, including but not limited to written tests or work sample tests or biographical data based on your resume or the checking of references, they add up and they can help support us in giving the best prediction possible. Okay? But you may be asking yourselves now, how do I prepare? And Dora is going to provide some more information to you.
That's right, Gustavo, thank you. So at this point, we have clarified definitions, we have seen the method, we have learned quite a lot of bits of information, but I'm sure that you are now wondering, what are the steps? How do I prepare? So let me show you how to prepare for such competency-based interviews. All right, so for starters, the first step is to review the job description or terms of reference, the way we call it, with a focus on the operational context. And the operational context will always be in a separate part of the job description. And I cannot encourage you enough to always focus on that and dissect it and really read it, because as it is with UN job descriptions, there is a generic part which is corresponding to position, step, and the field of function, but the operational context will be always individualized to the given vacancy we're applying to. So that's going to be a wealth of information for you right there. So many applicants wrongfully believe that just because they meet or even surpass the minimum requirements, that they are competitive for this position, but it is not the case actually. Upon reviewing the duties and responsibilities, they engage in an exercise. You should engage in an exercise to extricate relevant competencies and create potential questions. Today, we will engage in such an exercise with you, so we will get back to this later. Last but not least, you should think of relevant and genuine examples to take into account the complexity and level of positions that you are applying for. So if you are ready, let's move on to it.
Very good. So it's really important that you just don't take for granted what you see listed as the competencies. Dora is going to go over a little bit on the UNHCR competency structure.
Yeah, so it's quite a lot of things on the slide, so I let you read a little bit it yourself, and while you are reading it, I'm gonna share with you that, like other UN organizations, UNHCR has a set of competencies required to work at our organization, and the examples that you are reading are on the slides right now. When preparing for competency interviews, the most important thing is that you become familiar with the UNHCR's competency structure and what these competencies actually mean. This is because, as I explained earlier, most important is that you understand what behaviors compose that competency so that you tailor your answer to these. However, it is important that you also understand these competencies in the context of the job that you are applying for. And you remember, I just mentioned to you about the operational context of the job. So things are interlinking right there. Hence, the added value of looking at the competencies through the prism of the duties and responsibilities required by the role, also in the job description. Now let's put these things into context, and Gustavo will show us an example actually of a typical position at UNHCR, which we chose Associate Protection Officer. Over to you, Gustavo.
Very good. Many thanks, Dora. It's nice that we chose a position that's quite common across the globe in many duty stations, right? So let's look at one specific duty and responsibility, or tasks and responsibilities, depending on the organization you're looking at, that you would find in a job description or even the terms of reference, okay? So we have here, facilitate nationality solutions for those identified as stateless through partnership and advocacy with the authorities and assist individuals confirm nationality on a case-by-case basis through obtaining necessary documentation. I'll give you 15 seconds for you to read it again. I guess that's enough, right? Now you got an idea about this specific task and responsibility. What I want you to think about is the following. Can you write in the chat box a value, a core competence, or cross-functional competency that's associated to that one, even if it's not one of those in the competency structure within UNHCR? Again, I wanted you to put your thinking hat on and try and identify a competency associated to this particular task. Let's see what people have to say. I'm trying to monitor the chat here, but there are a lot of messages all the way down. So I'm still not seeing some competencies yet because it's going all the way, but let's see what we have.
We do have communication, political awareness, client and results orientation.
Fantastic. Can you keep on reading some more, Dora, please?
Yeah, professionalism, communication keeps on recurring. Judgment, decision making, integrity, professionalism,
Very
again,
good.
political awareness, partnership.
So as you can see, it could be many of those. It could be multiple competencies at the same time. What is your job? You need to do that for every duty and responsibility of the job you're applying for. That's why I need to repeat. Meeting the minimum requirements is not enough. I'll repeat again. Meeting the minimum requirements is not enough. I'll repeat a third time. Meeting the minimum requirements is not enough. It's your job in the application and in the interview to understand the tasks and responsibilities and understand the hidden or the obvious competencies associated to those specific tasks and responsibilities. And for you to actually engage in this exercise, it's an important step. So some of the individuals identified, let's say, communication, judgment, fine. In this specific context, we identified teamwork and collaboration, okay? Now you need to think about the definition of teamwork and collaboration. You can have your own definition. You don't necessarily need to know the definition of UNHCR. They will probably be quite harmonious or synchronized. But the definition, the official definition we have is demonstrates the ability to work effectively with colleagues and partners from different backgrounds, cultures, and functions to achieve goals and optimize results. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide now. In this next slide, as I mentioned earlier, most important that you look at the definition of the competency so that you understand the specific behaviors related to that position. So here's an example of decision making. As you can see, there are different levels as you can find it, entry and junior levels. What does it mean? Participates in team, unit projects, and performs assigned work. What are the behavior indicators for that? Demonstrating an ability to switch from one task to another at short notice, and the willingness to learn technical language and new concepts in order to accommodate the needs of the organization. Let's say that the position you're applying for is a mid-level position, let's say P3, P4, engages well with peers and immediate work group to ensure overall team assignments are successful as needed. One sample behavior indicator helps create a positive team spirit, putting aside personal considerations to help a team achieve goals. Let's say that within collaboration and teamwork, you are applying for a senior level position. Actively promotes a sense of team, but one's own actions ensures staff contributions are recognized. Another behavior indicator addresses problems rather than ignoring them or passing them on. Choosing the right option, not necessarily the easiest, and focusing on the solutions, not obstacles. So what did we do here? We looked at the duty and responsibility, extricated the appropriate competencies or competency about that, you also understand the operational context, and based on the job description, you can make inferences based on your experience to think about examples from the past in which you can indicate to the board members that you have either engaged in the similar activity successfully, or that you have done exactly those activities, or that you have transferable skills to engage in those. If it comes to the point in which you say to yourself, I have never done any of that, I would have no idea how to get started, you're probably not going to even reach the interview stage at that point. If you catch yourself going through the tasks and responsibilities and feeling like you have no commonality, again, you don't necessarily have to have engaged in those activities fully, but you have to have some touch points over your career. Okay? Let's continue and let's go to the very next slide. This is important for you to consider as well, Dora. Can you tell us about the role of the panel members during the interview? You're mute, Dora.
Sorry, okay, so I was so excited to talk about this because this is really an important piece of the puzzle here that we are putting together for your success at interviews. So behavioral indicators are important because the goal of the panel members during the interview that you participate in is to identify positive and negative behavioral indicators provided by you during your response. So what is your goal? Your goal is to ensure that you understand the competencies required by the job so that you can provide specific examples of positive behavioral patterns, which will provide evidence to the panel why you are a good fit for the position. What does it mean in practice? We will take a look at duties and responsibilities under the aforementioned Associate Protection Officer job description to see it.
Okay, very good. So now we're going to practice again. And keep in mind that this is a step-by-step process that we engage in every time we apply for a position by looking beyond the minimum requirements, looking at the duties and responsibilities, looking at the operational context, and aligning that with your own past experiences. So first, now let's see that we have this task and responsibility. Let's read that together. Provide capacity building of government officials and civil society actors on the topics of asylum and statelessness. Okay, let's read it again. Provide capacity building of government officials and civil society actors on the topics of asylum and statelessness. Now, what I'd like you to do is to select at least the top 2 competencies as listed on the slide. Go ahead, and Dora, you can help me read off the competencies that people are identifying. Can you enter in the chat box again?
Yes, let's hear your answers to the last question. You gave me great answers. So communication, client and results orientation, overwhelming number of communication, political awareness. Okay, communication answers are flooding us. Organizational awareness, commitment to learning, teamwork.
Very good. And it could be all of them, right? Your job as well is to look back at your experiences. And again, to show how you understand the operational context for that particular position to see what is most important. In our case, we selected teamwork and collaboration, and guess what? Communication. Okay, so let's continue with the exercise here. Some of the ways that you can practice is by using what I call the T technique. What is that? Every time you see a task and responsibility, you are going to think about a potential question. One thing that you saw that when Rosie described a biographical, a fit, motivational, a competency-based question, a technical question, one thing that was clear was there wasn't a closed question in there. It wasn't a question that you could say yes or no. It's like going to a psychologist. Instead of saying, do you have depression? No, the first question a psychologist asks is, what brings you here today? That opens the floor for you to speak whatever is in your mind. That's not very different from a behavioral interview. So typical questions that may come, they would start like this. Please describe your past experiences with. Tell us about a time when. Now, I want you to play a game with me now. When you look at the task and responsibility, provide capacity building of government officials and civil society actors on the topics of asylum and statelessness. What questions can you come up with to deal with that specific task and responsibility? You can get started with please describe or tell us about a time when. Dora, could you read the potential answers for me or potential questions that are coming up?
Sure. Oh, right now.
Yes.
Okay. So please describe your past experience with or tell us about a time when.
Can you check the chat and see what people are entering about potential questions?
Okay. Time you provided training to government officials. Organize workshops towards government officials. Describe your past experience with dealing with government agencies or civil society groups. Time you engaged with civil society actors.
Very good. Listen, people are being quite specific because that's what was asked, right? But let's not forget as well that questions may be a little more open, such as, please describe your past experience with capacity building. How about government officials? Beyond government officials, what other sectors or actors have you engaged in providing capacity building? What topics have you provided capacity building on? You see, there are no ways to predict a question with a follow-up if you haven't had this experience. And if you catch yourself having difficulties after creating this question in providing examples, that's probably because this job is not for you, even though you may have met the minimum requirements. Because minimum requirements are just minimum requirements. We'll continue. Let's go to the next exercise here. So provide capacity building of government officials and civil society actors on the topics of asylum and statelessness. Dora, could you read the potential question on the T technique to the right?
Tell us about a time when you provided capacity building to diverse stakeholders. Who were the stakeholders? What was the topic covered? How do they relate to the topics covered in the job you are applying for? How did you prepare materials? What was the outcome? And what did you learn in the process?
This is to show a lot of you that a lot of people complain saying, well, but these interviews are so formulaic and cooked that I could pretty much rehearse an answer in my mind and go back to the interview and pretend that I do it. No, you cannot. By the time a good interviewer is sitting with you and he or she is asking these follow-up questions, someone who's lying would be lost. And if there is one thing that a recruiter can do, is quickly identifying when you're bluffing, because we do that every day. So let's continue with more examples here. One more example, just to make sure that you really understand what we're trying to get to do with you. Okay, now Dora is going to read for us the task and responsibility, if that's okay, Dora. This is not just me talking, associated to the Associate Registration Officer P2. Could you read the task and responsibility?
Okay, here we go. Assist in the implementation of registration, enrollment, and digital identity strategies for populations of concern in compliance with global and regional protection and inclusion objectives and priorities, ensuring that relevant standards are met and appropriate methodologies and technologies are implemented.
Now we're going to give you 15 seconds to read it again. Now that you've read it again, I would like for you to enter in the chat box the top 2 competencies that you associate to this task and responsibility? Could you do that now? And Dora is going to read some of the answers for us.
We already have a lot of accountability, and I would just like to congratulate the group that already, they are with us. Like, it's a very, very good interaction. We have organizational awareness, client orientation, communication. Yeah, chat section is on fire. Communication, accountability, teamwork and collaboration. I mean, such a great audience today.
Very good. Thank you for that, Dora. One thing that's important, again, could it be all of them? Yes, it could. Your job is to understand the operational context and ensure that you understand the tasks and responsibilities enough to have a way to express your past experiences associated to that. If you catch yourself thinking that you don't have any relevant experience associated to that, most likely you wouldn't even be in the interview stage. But I also encourage you to engage in this exercise when you are applying for positions so that you can put your best foot forward, okay? So let's go back again. We identified the two major for us. Again, it could have been others, but this is just for the examples. Assist in the implementation of registration, enrollment, and digital identity strategies for populations of concern in compliance with global and regional protection and inclusion objectives and priorities, ensuring that relevant standards are met and appropriate methodologies and technologies are implemented. Mouthful. There is a lot of stuff in there. We identified accountability and client and results orientation, which many of you have identified as well. Now let's guess, how can you start with a question that is considered competency-based? Dora, could you read the potential beginnings of the questions on the right slide?
Yeah, the questions could begin with what past professional experiences, what's your experience with? Give us an example of a time in which, how did you handle the situation?
Now we're going to do the same. I'd like for you guys to look at those prompts and create a competency-based question based on the task and responsibility to the left. And Dora's going to read some of the answers for us. Again, you don't have to go drill down so much on the specifics, but you can drill down. You can actually focus on the big picture for that particular task and responsibility. Anything on the chat yet, Dora?
Oh, tons, Gustavo. Very good questions, actually. What's your experience with the implementation of digital identity strategies? Experience in implementation of registration and enrollment. Did you ever use a registration tool? Experience with compliance with global and regional protection inclusion priorities. Sorry, I'm blurring it. Communication and learning. Okay, that's something else.
Give us one more.
What's your experience with implementing strategies?
Fantastic. You see, it's big enough. But then you as what we're doing right now is helping you be in the shoes of the hiring manager and the recruiter, which is part of your job in preparation. And then you drill down, and we'll have some examples right here. What past professional experiences have you had that most aligns with the role in question? That's a very open-ended one, right? Or what's your experience with registration, enrollment, and digital identity strategies? Quite open, but targeting specific areas of that task and responsibility. Or give us an example in which compliance with relevant standards were not met. How did you handle the situation? Let's not forget as well that in many cases, some competency-based questions may be related to failure rather than success. For example, tell us about a time when something didn't go as planned. How did you handle the situation? And what did you learn in the process? Okay, so we'll continue now with more information from Dora.
Yeah, so in summary, when creating these competency-based interview questions, you must put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager and the recruiter. Now that you know how to create competency-based interview questions, and you really give really, really good answers. I'm sorry I couldn't read out all of them, but kudos to you. Now, actually, let's flip the coin and see how to respond to these amazing questions. We can go on to the next slide. Okay, here is something called a STAR technique. So like we saw in structuring your answer for fit questions, structuring your answers in competency-based interview questions is also a key. And the most common way of structuring your answers to these questions is something called STAR or STAR technique. And before I delve into what it means, I would just like to add that you might know why you are fit for the role. In your head are all your experiences with all the intricate details, and you feel you know actually why you are a good fit for the job, but you need to be able to showcase it. And we learned about the attention span, the cadence of the interview. So in that limited time you have, you wanna optimize and maximize it. And this technique, I think, is a wonderful tool for you to translate what you have professionally into a presentable way so that the interview panel members will also immediately understand why you are a very good fit for the job. So start by presenting the situation, then go to task where you have to be very clear on what your role was. And actually, I received this advice. Don't talk about the role of the group you were part of. Talk about your specific individual role, what you yourself did. Action then is a step-by-step of what you did about it. There we go. This is where listing the behaviors related to the competency will help you choose what information you state here. And then result, the R, is what the final outcome was. So that's what the STAR stands for.
Correct. Dora, would you mind reading specifically the context, your role and objectives, what and how, and the outcome in the boxes?
Sure. So S is for situation. That's where you give the context. For example, sudden influx of refugees put pressure on registration. Picture is painted. T, task, your role and objectives. I was in charge of implementing the data system for registration. Then you move on to A, which is action, the what and the how. For example, first I assessed, then consulted with donors, government authorities. So it's a lot of verbs, a lot of action that were happening because of you and through you. And then R, the results, is the outcome, the benefits, the impact, and the rewards. For example, registration backlog was reduced by, and then you refer back.
Exactly. And a good tip that I give everyone who interviews is the following. In many situations, if you're interviewing on video, obviously you can have pen and paper, and you can tell individuals, hey, would you mind if I took a few notes before answering? In that 15 to 30 seconds, you can pretty much structure the answer by thinking, okay, right, star, situation, here, task, here, action, here, results, here, and think about what you learned in the process as well, because that indicates your level of maturity as a professional when it comes to learning from experiences. And this is something that's very important for us to see in our type of environment. Dora, can you tell us a little more about emphasizing your impact?
Yeah, so it is really important that you focus on your role and your impact in answering these types of questions. And when you are preparing for an interview, have these questions in mind for yourself. What was your impact? What did you do? And as I have mentioned it before, you is with capital letters because always focus on your role, your task. So speak about your added value and influence in a situation.
Very good. It's really important for us to actually note that there are cultural and personality considerations as well. Some would say, depending on the person, even gender aspects, that many people from different cultures or different personalities may feel uncomfortable using I did this, emphasizing their role, emphasizing their impact. Okay. We also understand and acknowledge that the whole idea of competency based interviews and behavioral questions tend to be quite Western focused, if not North American focused. This is the reason why we're conducting this webinar, to help everyone who may not be fully familiar with this understand how to best optimize their ability to provide information to us that you are a fit. One trick that I tell folks who may be embarrassed to take ownership of what they do is put it on the table. You can say something the lines of, I understand that during this interview, I am supposed to be talking about me and I. This is quite difficult for me, but I'll try my best to separate what my group did from what I did so that I can add value. If I keep referring to the group, please make sure that you ask me again how to emphasize my role. So you put that on them, and you're being clear about your level of comfort in engaging these types of tasks, okay? I know that you guys have been listening to Dora and I for quite a while. We're gonna go back to Nelly and Rosie very soon, but I think Dora has a few more slides before we move to them. Go ahead, Dora.
Yeah, and we are nearing toward the end of the presentation, and thank you very much for bearing with us and also commenting in the chat. So as Gustavo said, always put it out there. If you have something, be authentic, be genuine. That's how you will feel most comfortable about yourself. And interviewers know it's a high pressure situation, so it's no shame about that, right? What's important during the interview before you answer, control your answer, be in charge of it. Given the consequence of not doing so, clarifying is the most important skill in any job function, meaning you can ask back. So don't be afraid to ask the interview panel members to repeat or ask questions back and be clear on what you need to answer before doing so. You see how if you don't do that, you can take not a very optimal direction with your answer. Also, be open to modify the answer. For example, if the question is about conflict resolution with a supervisor and you do not have an example of that situation, but you do have one of conflict resolution with a team, tell the interviewers and ask if you can provide the example around conflict resolution in a team setting. You are still offering something and showing your flexibility.
Very good. Let's see who is coming up next year. Well, apparently it's me, unfortunately. So, what are behaviors you would expect to see in someone who is an effective communicator? So look at that. You need to adapt your message to your audience. You need to structure. You need to be concise. Remember what Rosie said about 3 minutes, you hit the spot. More than that, you may begin losing people. Another thing that's important as well, when you give an answer, you give an example, think about the depth and the breadth of the example. You may give a perfect response to a question about collaboration, but if you are applying for a P5 and you give us kind of a P2 type of example, that may not be so good. You need to think about the role you're applying for and the kind of added value that you may need to give in that particular role. Okay, so adapt to your audience. Again, Dora is going to give a final word here again to remind you exactly what panel members do during a competency-based interview.
I actually think we have covered this bit that they are really zooming on the positive behavioral indicators. So make sure to give positive ones and not the negative ones. Make sure that they put comments on the good section of your interview notes. Yeah, I think I can give it back to Rosie and Nelly now.
Very good. So now we're going to go back to our guest speakers. Rosie, take it back, please.
Thank you. So in all the interview panels that I've attended, I think there's a certain tendency of typical things that people might go wrong in. And the first one is really not having understood the competency. So making that effort to do what Gustavo's shown you today of looking at those competencies. What does leadership mean? What does teamwork mean? Is really important so that you make sure that you address the question that's being asked. So that would be the first thing. The second one is when people start rambling, so they're not structuring their answers. So using the STAR framework is really, really useful because it gives you automatically a very structured way of replying. The issue that Gustavo brought up is really important. I know that in some cultures, I'm half Spanish, and on the Spanish side of me, I don't like talking about myself. The British side has no problem at all. It's true that we find it very difficult to talk in the first person, but just think about that we're hiring you, we're not hiring your team, we're not hiring your supervisor. And when people start talking in we don't know who took that decision, we don't know who did that action. So you need to talk in I simply because we're hiring you. So that's I think super important. And then finally, I would say that within the STAR framework, the part that's most important to the interviewers is action. It's where you're reflecting those behaviors, those specific steps that you took are mirrored in the behaviors that we're looking for in the competency. So you don't need to spend a lot of time talking about the situation. People often, they go to very challenging situations and they spend a lot of time talking about, no, you don't understand just how complex that was. We're not hiring the situation. So having just one phrase that shows the complexity of the situation is enough, because the bulk of your answer that you really have to focus on is on the action side, and then touch on the other parts of the framework. So over to you.
Rosie. Super. Nelly, can you tell us a little more about the slide that we have in front of us?
Sure. Thank you, Gustavo. Rosie talked a lot, and also Gustavo and Dora talked a lot about how to give proof of your competences. And that's only one part of the puzzle, a very, very important part of the puzzle. But one's work output comes together from the combination of the person's skills and also the person's drive. Therefore, interviewers are trying to predict high performance at the intersection of a high level of skills, so showing why you are qualified, and a high drive, why you want the job. Giving a proof of skills, it's important, but also motivation and enthusiasm also play a key role in the interviewer judging you as the best candidate, because they know that high performance is not only based on skills, but also on a desire to perform well. And this comes from motivation.
Very good. Thank you, Nelly. Now let's go back to Rosie about what people remember in interviews.
Yeah, so this presentation so far is focused very much on the content, what it is that you need to reply, but it's also how you reply that actually has an impact. And if you think about every interaction that you have with a person, you're constantly making judgments based on other factors apart from what they're saying. And this is studies that were taken by Albert Barabia back in the 70s. I think he did this. And what people remember are actually other things. The words are of course important, but actually you're also making judgments based on people's body language. So do you look as if you're, in your place, that you're keen that you can do that job, or are you looking as if you're absolutely terrified and you think, oof, that person maybe wouldn't be able to do the job? And then also the tone of voice. So the way that people speak, whether it's confident, whether it's aggressive, the way that the tone in which people speak, also people make enormous judgments. So we can look in the next slide because we can see this a little bit more in detail. We're making judgments all the time in terms of the pitch, for example, of your voice. It's quite interesting because in the case of male candidates, having a very deep voice shows, they're powerful, that they can do things. We make judgments on women having a very deep voice. And the same as we make, very judgments if they've got a very high pitched voice and you think actually they sound a little bit hysterical. The way that we speak, the rhythm in which we speak, people are also making judgments. So you have to pay attention to this. People that tend to speak in a very monotone way and don't change the way that they speak tends to send people a little bit more to sleep. So, making sure that the way that you speak moderates your voice so that it's interesting, it's lively, it shows enthusiasm. That's super important. Speed, really important. My nickname when I was small was Kalashnikov because I have a tendency to speak very, very fast. That can convey enthusiasm, but it can also convey a lot of nervousness. And again, people might be subconsciously taking judgments on the fact that you're speaking far too quickly, and so the person is too nervous. You can use pauses, and that can be a very, very powerful thing, especially when you're making a good statement. I've worked at UNHCR for 7 years in the realm of recruitment. So you have a nice little pause, and so that can really sit well with the panelists. But don't use it too much, because then it's, you know, what's wrong? You know, it's just so. But it can be a powerful way of conveying, you know, messages. And finally, volume. This is much more difficult in an online setting, because you really don't necessarily know what, you know, people, how much they're hearing you. And it used to happen a lot more on the phone. Now with these type of meetings, etc., it's less prevalent. But it's really important to do those sound checks at the beginning of an interview. Can you hear me well? So that you're not talking so loud because you feel that people aren't listening to you. So it's in interviews, it's important to look at the content, absolutely, structure, absolutely, but also start reflecting a little bit on how you're going to be conveying that information in delivery.
Very good, Rosie. Now we're going to go to the next slide, also with you, Rosie, on nonverbal communication.
And I think, you know, just preparing for interviews, one of the things is that there's a lot of nonverbal communication taking place as well. So be on time. I mean, what sort of a message are you giving your interviewers if you're not there on time? And I think in the interviewer itself, it's also a matter of good communication. So you have to be very sensitive to the other person's time. Sometimes, you know, we're having to tell candidates, please keep your answers short, because, you know, we've got another candidate coming behind them, and we're trying to keep to an interview schedule. So you have to be very sensitive to this, and you can take control over, look, do you want a short answer? Do you want a long answer? And they can tell you, no, for the moment, keep it short, and then we can ask you some follow-up questions. Another aspect is that people sometimes, when they're nervous, they talk over other people. So and they can do that to the interviewer. So they don't allow the interviewer to basically, you know, manage the structure of the interview. Don't do that, because it's again, it doesn't cause a very good impression. And what's super important is, you know, just smile. Even if it's over the phone, smile, because that sends a whole lot of neural messages that relaxes you. Even just the act of smiling, it relaxes your throat, so you don't sound so nervous. So even if you don't feel like smiling, smile away, because you'll come over as being a lot more relaxed in the interview, and that in itself, you know, releases you being able to deliver the questions that you've already prepared.
Very good. Now let's take a look at a recruiter's perspective, right? We try to put you in the hiring manager's perspective. Now we're talking about the recruiter as well. Can you tell us a little more, Dora?
Yes, a little behind the scenes, if you will, with the recruiter's perspective. So you can see that these are the steps from not selected to selected. So just for you to know that this is something you need to build up to. So we are going from the left to the right towards selected. So first rank would be the candidate doesn't have the relevant experience upon which to draw, or experience or behaviors aren't aligned with UNHCR's requirements. A candidate does have the relevant experience, but chooses the wrong examples would be the second verse, to put it like that. What does this mean? For example, the candidate doesn't listen to the question, but is very rigidly sticking to their own agenda. Again, be mindful of that and trust yourself. You have all the knowledge inside you. So it's fine if people, you know, intervene with a question. You will be able to answer it, but listen to the question and just take it from there. Candidate hasn't considered why the question is being asked, or haven't thought through the example, would be also grouped under this point. The next phase would be the candidate has relevant experience and selects a good example, but cannot externalize the information. What does it mean they cannot externalize the information? Maybe they demonstrate arrogance even, or don't take the opportunity to sell themselves, or maybe the candidate talks too much, or maybe they use irrelevant information. So the good material is there, but it's not communicated in a way that the panel members receive it. And finally, of course, where all elements are in place, then the candidate has the right experience, he or she selects good examples and delivers it through good communication.
Very good. Let's go back to what do candidates tend to do right?
Yes. I think it's mine. Yeah. Gustavo, thank you very much. I think I saw lots of comments that people would like to receive a recording of this session, and there was so much information. It would be really useful for everyone to listen to it again. And we have already told you lots of tips and best practices for preparation. But before we close, I would like to convey a few last tips in terms of preparing for interviews. The first one is research, because if you research, you will be able to ask good questions at the end of the interview. And this will be your last impression as you leave, a last chance to make yourself remembered. And research shows that both first and last impression are what counts in deciding on the candidate. The second one, which is related to research, is prepare with questions. There is a very famous researcher and writer on career issues, Daniel Porot, and he has a famous quotation: "In work, you are judged far more by the questions you ask than by the answers you give." And candidates who ask pertinent questions impress. And that's a very tangible way of showing what you know and that you are on their level, on the interviewer's level. And my last tip would be practice. And I love this quote we have on the screen. It's a funny thing. The more I practice, the luckier I get. And that's very appropriate, I think. So thank you.
Very good, Nelly. And we are coming to the very last slide. So before we go, we do have a few things to let you know as well. First of all, please make sure that you actually go to our website, unhcr.org/careers, to learn more about the resources that we have available. For all of you who may already be working at UNHCR, do not forget your good old Learn and Connect that has plenty of information on job applications, on interview preparation, on career management, on career development that you really want to leverage, okay? We will continue providing resources to applicants as well, again, based on best practices. And just a reminder that when you're coming to an interview, there's no interviewer wanting to see you fail. We all want to see you succeed. We are all looking forward to having someone put their best foot forward, demonstrating their ability to add value to UNHCR. And we are here to see you do well. So walk in with that mindset, or turn on the computer with that mindset before you get started. All right. We are at about 75 minutes of presentation. So we don't have that much time for questions, but we'll take just a few questions before we go. Okay. One question that popped up that was very relevant was the following. Someone said, is there any resource on preparing for written assessments? Which is kind of funny because Rosie and I were talking about that before this presentation. We don't have that yet, but we will be offering these resources to internal applicants, internal staff, and also to externals in the very near future. So continue following Dora on LinkedIn to get that information, or follow the official UNHCR page. Another question that I have here, and I'll ask Rosie to answer that if that's okay, is how many questions should I ask at the end of the interview? Rosie, what's your insights on that?
I mean, what typically happens is people always ask a question around how soon will I know, etc. And I think that question at the end is a golden opportunity to win the heart of the hiring manager. So I would prepare one good strategic question for the hiring manager. Just ask them about, the work. If you've done a little bit of research, you might even get some information that, I see that UNHCR has been moving in this direction. What specifically in this operation are you doing about that? I think I would ask maybe prepare a couple of questions, but usually there's only time for one. So really try to use that question effectively, and you need to do research to come up with the right question. You know, what Nelly was saying of Danielle, you're judged by the questions you ask, is very much that. If, you know, if a manager hears a question which is a little bit what's keeping you awake at night, and then usually what happens with those questions is that at the very end you can follow up with saying, oh, fantastic, because actually in my background I did this, I did that, and I think I could support you with that. And that's how you finish the interview. So it's really leaving the very best, you know, most positive message just before you close the interview.
Very good. I do have another question here. How detailed should I be in answering my questions? Nelly, would you give us a little information on that?
Sure, sure. I think we mentioned earlier in the presentation that altogether it should be around 3 minutes. It shouldn't be too long. You shouldn't be lost in the details, especially in the description, because they lose track. The interviewers lose track, especially if it's hard to follow. So it's better to stay straight to the point, but state all the relevant facts that you want to state. Stay within 3 minutes. That's really a safe rule to keep the attention. And also what we mentioned about the structuring, that you introduce, then you basically state your 3 points, and then you link your 3 points, you summarize it, and you link it to the question. So make it a round, nice story.
Very good. Dora, that's a question for you. If the panel members are looking for positive behavioral indicators, would you have an example of a negative behavior indicator, for example? That's a tough one, let's minute. But go ahead.
So it's quite instinctive or intuitive, right? So positive indicators are all the good examples that showcase why you are a good fit for the job. Maybe showcasing a couple of examples from similar situations that you had in the past. So this can teach you about what a negative one is. So I think not many people would offer a negative one, right? But a negative one is which would show how you couldn't solve a situation similar to what is being asked about. So, or with the duties and responsibilities, the key duties and responsibilities are listed, and suddenly you start talking about how those specific types of actions or parts of your past job were your biggest challenges and you always struggled, and you know, these things very intuitive. So just always give good examples to demonstrate that you've done this before, or something similar, or something even not very similar, but something you can transfer to the current job. You can translate it to the current job you apply for.
Correct. And there is one thing that's important as well. We are talking about providing people with resources to do well. There's nothing better than being in an interview in which you have relevant experience and you know how to articulate that experience. What happens if you're a great interviewer, but you don't have relevant experience? You probably shouldn't be even in the interview stage at that point. If you, again, engage in that exercise of looking at the duties and responsibilities or tasks and responsibilities, break it down and see how much of those duties and responsibilities have you accomplished in the past. And if not, what the relevant skills you have. Again, we do have to get going now, but I would like to recommend that you visit unhcr.org/careers. We will be making this recording available not only on the website, but hopefully to everyone else who might be invited for interviews in the future. And we are very appreciative of your time. We are part of the UN family. We are very happy to see people interested in working towards the Sustainable Development Goals. And we are very happy that you have decided to join UNHCR for this presentation to learn more. Many thanks to Dora, to Rosie, and to Nelly for participating. And for those of you watching the recording, check us out on LinkedIn. We're going to have a lot more resources for you. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Bye.
live section too. Bye-bye.
Okay, guys, we stopped recording.